Good afternoon, good morning, good evening. No matter where you are, welcome to this session about CMB's view on Euronav strategy. My name is Katrien. I'm head of marketing and communication at CMB and the moderator of this session. We will start with an introduction by our CEO, Alexander Saveris. After this introduction, we will start the Q&A. For your information, we will record this session and make the recording available. I now give the floor to Alexander.
Thank you very much, Katrien, and welcome everyone. I am joined today by my brother, Ludovic Saveris, who's the CFO of CMB. What we wanted to do before we start the Q&A session is shortly recap what we have said in our press release about Euronav strategy and our view on Euronav strategy. The first point we mentioned is the supervisory board. We have asked at the General Assembly of the 23rd of March to replace the entire supervisory board, and we have done this for the following reasons. The first one is, I think it's clear to everyone that the supervisory board has opposed our view and opposed our actions since more than 10 months now. And we as CMB don't feel represented by them. That is why we think it is logical that we propose an alternative board. There's a second reason. We see that the supervisory board continues to repeat their bigger is better doctrine, meaning that they want Euronav strategy to be centered around acquiring other tanker companies, merge into other tanker companies, or be taken over by other tanker companies. And I think, again, it has been made pretty clear by us that we disagree with that strategy. There's another reason that we would like to mention is that we see that the current supervisory board continues to try to hang on to the failed combination agreement. And we believe that there's a waste of time, of money, and of energy. And again, for all these reasons, we would like a set of new faces to represent the company after these very tumultuous times, to bring back serenity, to bring back calm, and to have a fresh view on the strategy of the company. Moving on to the strategy then. This is also something we mentioned in our press release. We see Euronav, and that's of course our view, to having a strategy around being a standalone tanker company. We want the company to ride the tanker cycle, to pay dividends, to buy back shares potentially, and base this on a very sound commercial strategy. That, at least in the short run, is what we would see as a strategy for Euronav. Moving ahead, after the 23rd of March, with the newly elected supervisory board, we would like to have a discussion about a possible new medium to long-term strategy, which, in our view, should be centered around diversifying the fleet and decarbonizing. Diversifying into other shipping assets and investing meaningful amounts of money into the decarbonization of the shipping industry to create long-term shareholder value. We have then said something about CMB Tech as well, and I think we should mention it today as well. The CMB Tech file has been on the table in 2021, beginning 2022. But ever since, the supervisory board has made very clear to us that they did not want to entertain any discussion around CMB Tech. It has not been on the table. So CMB Tech has not been on the table for more than 12 months now and will not be on the table at the next General Assembly. This being said, we believe that if the supervisory board would decide to steer the company in the medium to long run towards diversifying the fleet and decarbonizing, CMB Tech could be a good catalyst to execute that strategy, but by no means the only catalyst. It is one possible avenue, but not the only one. Before we open the floor for questions, we would like to answer questions around Frontline and the management board. We received a lot of questions about our relationship with Frontline and what our view is on the current management board of the company. Starting with Frontline, we have had a lot of informal discussions over the past 6 to 8 months with Frontline, with the Euronav supervisory board, try to find a solution, to try to find common ground on a project for the company. Unfortunately, these discussions have led to nothing so far. And we have decided after the 9th of January, when the combination agreement was terminated, that we put any further discussion on hold until after the General Assembly, until after the 23rd of March. It is our aim and our willingness to very quickly after the General Assembly, sit down with the newly elected Supervisory Board, with Frontline and ourselves to talk about the future strategy of the group. You have asked questions about possible solutions like demerger, sale of assets, etc. All these elements are not on the table today. These are possible solutions, but as we have not discussed these in details, there's not a lot we can say about that today. Moving to the Management Board, our view is that it is up to the Supervisory Board to have a discussion with the Management Board after the 23rd of March to hear their views on the strategy of the group. And if the Supervisory Board is of the opinion that changes should happen in the Management Board, that is their prerogative through the Nomination Committee. So this being said, I think we can open the floor for some of your questions.
So we will now start with the Q&A. If you would like to ask a question, just raise your hand and I will make it possible for you to turn on your microphone yourself. Please start by introducing yourself. Repeat your name and the name of the company you work for. To allow as many people as possible to contribute, we kindly invite you to ask only one question. If your question is not answered, you can always contact us by email. So let's go to the first question. The first question is from a dial-in number. So if your number ends with 9315, you can now ask your question.
Hi there. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hi. Yes, thank you. It's Amit Mehrotra here with Deutsche Bank. I really appreciate you holding this conference call. Thank you very much. I guess maybe a two-part question, if I may. First, I'd like to understand a little bit more details around the vision you have for a diversified and decarbonized Euronav. There's the only real proposal on the table in a concrete way involves CMB Tech. And while I understand maybe that was a no-go and you're open to other future alternatives, what you're really asking for is essentially control of the company via the Supervisory Board with a minority shareholder stake, and not a lot of detail with respect to what that diversification strategy could look like down the road. And in the near term, it seems like the strategy is completely aligned with the existing Supervisory and Management Board. So I'd love for you to provide a little bit more meat on the bone around the future strategy. And then the follow-up question to that, if I may, is, I believe CMB was on the board when Euronav acquired Generate, and obviously that was a bigger, translates to better strategy and was a very value accretive deal. So I'd love to know kind of, why you went on board with that acquisition and now kind of saying, bigger is not necessarily better in this time around. If you could just address those 2 points. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Amit. Thanks for your questions. I'll start with your last point. Generate was back in 2017, 2018. Ever since that deal, the world has changed. We believe that, we bought a T-shirt. We knew what the Generate deal has given us, also in terms of synergies and integrating, seeing, all the so-called positive effects of that. It's fair to say that it didn't realize what we expected. And meanwhile, the energy transition in shipping has become a much more important topic. So we've changed our mind. And over the past 5 years, a lot of things have changed. Coming back to your questions on, what it means concretely on the diversification and decarbonization, there's not a lot we can tell you today, because obviously, this reflection needs to happen on the board level. And as long as we don't have a willingness from the board to look into that, it can be many things, but everything I would tell you today would not be executed down the line anyway. Talking to what the difference would be between the current Supervisory Board executing a strategy of running it as a good tanker company and a new Supervisory Board coming in, the two big differences are the current Supervisory Board wants to pursue mergers, becoming bigger, to become better. whereas we respectfully disagree. And on the second point, they do not want to reflect on these 2 points that we just mentioned, diversifying and decarbonizing. And that's why we believe, and that's why CMB is presenting new directors.
I don't know if I can follow up or not, but the follow-up question I have around this is, we talk about energy transition and the end goal, which is decarbonization, but there is a long transition period between now and then. And I've always thought, I've always had a lot of respect for Euronav and how they've conducted their capital allocation, but they are also the largest shipper of a fossil fuel, which is crude oil. And so the question I have is that, how does your strategy or the new supervisory board's potential strategy not ultimately result in a complete, divestiture of the current business as you see today, given that that's really the only path towards decarbonization? If you could just address that, because there seems to be this disconnect between kind of the near-term strategy and the mid to long-term, and I just want to understand that a little bit better.
Sure, Amit. And I'll answer your question because obviously I think a lot of other people have that question probably. What you're hinting at is that we would basically sell out all the tankers overnight and reinvest everything into decarbonized solutions. That is not what we want to do. We want to gradually use the cash flows that come from the good markets in tankers, and we believe the next 2-3 years will be good, I think, together with a lot of shareholders, and then gradually start investing in a diversification of the fleet and decarbonization. You mentioned that there's a long way to decarbonize the industry. I agree with you. That's why we need to start today. The longer we wait, the less we will have solutions for the future of our industry, and the longer it will take for companies that are 100% dependent on crude oil transportation to create long-term value for their shareholders. By the way, what we are advocating here, I would say, is not rocket science. A lot of our customers are doing it as well. All the oil majors are doing exactly that. They're diversifying their portfolio, and they're trying to find ways to decarbonize.
Okay. Thank you very much. Appreciate you taking my questions.
So we go to the next question. Question is from Richard Mead. Go ahead, Richard.
Thank you for taking the question. It's a really simple one. What happens if the vote doesn't go your way on March 23rd? Do you have a plan? It's obviously been a fairly tumultuous period for everybody involved, and there needs to be some stability. Serenity was your word. If this doesn't go your way, is there more turbulence ahead?
There is definitely more talks ahead, Richard. Turbulence is something we want to avoid at all costs. The biggest turbulence has been caused, obviously, by the combination agreement. That is now out of the way. We have a company now which is represented by a supervisory board, and we have our disagreements with them, and which has 2 large shareholders holding 25% each, with other 50% minority shareholders. I'm convinced now that the combination agreement is out of the way, the discussions after the 23rd of March will be calm and effective, whatever happens on the vote. Let me state this. We really want to find a solution. We want to find a quick solution. So even if the vote doesn't go in our direction, we will sit around the table with all the parties that are in place.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Please raise your hand. I can see a next question from Thijs Berkelder. Thijs, go ahead. You can turn on your microphone, Thijs.
Yeah. Good afternoon. You hear me?
Yes, we do.
Very good. Question 1. Why would Euronav, under your leadership, still invest in new tankers and not use all cash for reinvestment in other asset classes? And second question, you're proposing or saying that you're returning ASAP cash to shareholders via dividends and share buybacks. Are you there sticking to the, let's say, 80% rule as defined by Euronav earlier, or are you targeting much lower cash returns and or maybe much higher usage of free cash flow for, again, new asset classes? So implicitly, what, let's say, your leadership will be the future capex mix between tankers and other assets?
Thijs, I'll answer the first one, and Ludovic will answer the second one. So on the first question, until a new strategy has been defined for the company, it will continue to be run as a standalone tanker company. And investing in new vessels is part of that. So that's a short answer to your first question. On the dividends, maybe Ludovic can say something?
Yeah, sure. Thijs, as we've stated in our press release, we will continue the current dividend policy. And obviously, it's going to be for the new supervisory boards to reflect whether that's still the appropriate dividend policy for the strategy we're choosing. And that's not just us to decide, as a shareholder we'll have our say, but it's going to be the new supervisory boards. Obviously, if on the medium term we're starting diversifying, we will have to look for the money somewhere. Now, we also see obviously a potential in the balance sheet of Euronav. It has a very strong balance sheet, where I think the leverage today is probably somewhat suboptimal compared to the other peers we have in the tanker sector. And so there's definitely a lot of means to invest, diversify, while keeping the same dividend policy.
Yeah. Okay, thank you for that. Then coming back on my first question, if it were up to you as leadership, why would you still invest in rejuvenation of the tanker fleet, in new tankers? By not investing, you only would increase the mismatch between demand supply, so only would make higher cash flow from your existing tanker fleet. So isn't that in the end your purpose?
In the end, our purpose, first of all, Thijs, we are not in the leadership. We are a 25% shareholder. Ultimately, it's the shareholders that will have to elect the supervisory board, and they will take the decisions. They will take the decisions, first and foremost, what to do with the strategy of the company, continue as a standalone company and maybe diversify in the future, continue to order vessels or not, depending on the supply-demand situation and what the view is on the strategy. So I think today, there's not a lot more we can say about that. Investing in vessels is a prerogative of the supervisory board to decide. And if there's a strategy to run this as a good tanker company, it might be part of that strategy.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Thanks.
The next question is from Luc van Beek. Luc, you can now turn on your microphone.
Yes, thank you. I was wondering if you could explain a bit your view on which part of the expertise of Euronav could be useful in other shipping markets, and how you see that diversification. Because do you think that it would make sense to buy individual vessels in different markets, or do you think that they should buy an entire fleet at once to have a critical mass from the start? So can you a bit explain why you think Euronav is the right company to execute this diversification strategy using its current expertise and know-how?
Yes, Luc. Euronav starts with its people on the technical side, operational side, finance side. All these divisions work very well to run a tanker company, and all that expertise can perfectly be used as well to run different other shipping sectors. The only thing we would need to add, if, for instance, we would expand in dry bulk shipping, is a commercial team. So we don't think that is a real issue. On the contrary, we think that with the current base of people and the infrastructure that we have around Euronav, it's a very good platform to add different shipping segments into it. Moving to whether we would do it piecemeal or big fleet deals, anything goes. I think it will all depend on the economics of the deal. We don't think you need to do this in huge steps per se, but if a great deal or a good major deal would be presented to the company, again, supposing the board agrees with that strategy, they should definitely go for it. So one by one or big fleet deals, will depend on the value and the economics.
And let me maybe also add to what Alex is saying on the first question, Luc. Euronav has the people, obviously, has the knowledge. They have a very strong ship management, which obviously is an in-house right now, which can be used in different sectors. But also the fact that they have a dual listing, that they have a relatively large market cap. If you can combine that with, I think, a sound medium-term strategy, you can attract a lot of long-term investors, which we believe there's a need for large shipping companies to have long-term view on, how we're going to solve the challenges. But that dual listing, we definitely see as a benefit as well if we want to implement a strategy of diversification and decarbonization.
And related to that, in the oil tanker market, do you think that size is a factor that determines the profitability and the success of a company, or do you think that's entirely irrelevant? Because Euronav has always been claiming that you have much better market information when you're a bigger tanker company than when you're a small player with only a couple of tankers. Do you disagree with that view?
Look, I agree with that view if you manage it commercially on a large platform like Tankers International. But I disagree with you in terms of just owning the assets. We are all price takers. Shipping is a commoditized market. You cannot force your pricing upon your customers. That doesn't work. However, there is a lot of value in managing larger fleets commercially, operationally, in terms of positioning your fleet and making sure that you have as many vessels in front of your customers as possible to take opportunities. This is what we've basically said already in April. Euronav does not need to merge with Frontline to become more efficient. You can work together through platforms like Tankers International.
Okay, that's clear. Thank you for now.
The next question is from a dial-in number. So if your number ends with 9051, you can now turn on your microphone.
Yeah, hi, it's Chris Weatherby from Citi. Can you guys hear me?
Yes,
Yeah,
Chris.
perfect.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thanks for taking the question. I guess I think something that investors are struggling with here is that there was a perception of value creation through the Frontline Euronav merger. And obviously when that deal, I think by evidence, that when the deal ultimately fell apart, the stock, reacted quite negatively. You're asking for seats on the board, suggesting that the company should go back to riding the tanker cycle, which I think investors are kind of questioning whether that's actually a strategy or just sort of managing a pool of assets. And I think you have been, a little reluctant to provide detail around the decarbonization strategy, but you're asking for board members. So I guess what I think a lot of people are asking me is, what is the strategy, or why should investors vote for you to be on the board? It doesn't seem like there's a lot behind what you're suggesting here. So, maybe I'm missing something. Maybe you guys can provide a little bit more detail, because I think that'd be really helpful for investors to understand your position.
Well, I'll start with something. Don't vote for the CMB dependent directors if you're in favor of merging with Frontline or other companies. I think that difference has been made clear. We are not in favor of mergers or huge vessel acquisitions in the tanker space. But do vote for us and for the CMB directors if you want to have more balance in the board to talk about the strategy. And again, it will be every shareholder to decide who he votes for or not. But clearly the CMB directors, the two dependent ones that we are suggesting, will want to discuss in the board not only the short-term strategy of running it as a good tanker company, but on top of that, discussing a future-proof strategy. And what investors are struggling with, I would say some investors are struggling with, is of course our much longer-term view on value creation than the short-term view of just putting two tanker companies together. And of course, I respect that difference in view, but I think we are entitled to have a differing opinion, and with us, actually, some other investors as well.
Understood. I think that's helpful. I guess I think the market looks at the value creation between the two transactions and then the value X the transactions. So yeah. I guess from your perspective, there's just not something that you're able to or willing to say at this point of how you're going to create that value. I think that's really the question. How do you guys create the incremental value?
Well, give us a seat at the board. And of course, we hope that we will be represented. and we will engage very soon to show how value can be created. But let me say something about the stock and how it has been trading. Clearly, in our view, the fact that the stock is trading badly compared to its peers today is because of the uncertainty around the company, which is, of course, understandable. And this is also why, very quickly, we have sent out our question to bring together a General Assembly so that shareholders can vote on a new composition of the board to take away the uncertainty. And then it will, of course, be to the new board to restore confidence with a clear view on all the issues that we have been discussing in this call so far.
Okay. Fair to say that maybe you guys added a little bit to that uncertainty, to be honest with you, but that makes sense. I appreciate the time. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thanks a lot. I'll just finish with that. I was not a signatory to the combination agreement. I think we have brought a lot of certainty about our opinion. The fact that it then fell apart, that is then something you should ask the supervisory board of Euronav and Frontline, of course.
The next question is also via a dial-in number. If your number ends with 9315, go ahead.
Hey, it's Amit Mehrotra here with Deutsche Bank again. Thanks for allowing the follow-up. I want to go back to the question earlier around dividends and leverage. You know, the shipping industry is kind of littered with examples of over-levered companies or companies that aren't necessarily disciplined with predetermined capital allocation metrics. And ultimately that leads to indiscipline and sometimes impaired equity value. If I heard you correctly, and correct me if I'm wrong, basically if a new supervisory board is elected, there's a chance that the surplus cash flows are reallocated to new investments, whatever they are, and you would also dip into the balance sheet to raise the leverage of the company. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but that seems like what you said. And I mean, at the end of the day, the last question I had already is this: if you're a board, you have a fiduciary to the shareholders of the company, and that recipe, of levering up to buy assets, is not necessarily has been a great strategy historically for creating equity value. I don't know how you would address that.
Yeah, Amit, again, when looking at investments, when looking at a capital allocation strategy, there's multiple tools. What we just feel today is that the balance sheet of Euronav has a lot of potential, and I think could be used probably a little bit more proactively. Obviously, we are more than aligned with all the shareholders owning 25%, not to go too far, not to make the risks, use the experience that we had in other companies to make sure that this is in a sound and prudent way. I think this is where we're heading. The question from Thijs on the, I think it was Thijs on the okay, you're going to have to redirect some capital allocation for dividends if you want to do, investments. Yes, of course, we can't, turn the tap on and create money. We're going to have to get it from somewhere.
Yeah, but if I could just respond to that, because let me just say, if you reallocate dividends and raise leverage, the stock's going down. Okay, so are you okay? I mean, the stock's already lost $500 million of value on the back of the breakup of Frontline. So the question I have for you is: Are you basically saying that you want to take control of the supervisory board? If shareholders vote for you, they have to be willing to accept a near-term impairment of the equity value, because that's what would happen, and that's what's happened throughout time. If you look at changes in strategy like that from a capital allocation perspective.
I think, Amit, I just mentioned to bring the leverage more in line with the peers. When you look at some peers, NAT, DHT, they have very low leverage, but some others like Frontline have somewhat higher leverage.
Does that mean sort of like 50% LTV versus 30% today? Like, give us some parameters around that.
I think there, again, I'm going to have to reflect to the new supervisory board. We have our view, but it's going to be the supervisory board to reflect the leverage and the use of balance sheet to the company strategy, Amit. And I think today, putting a number...
Wouldn't you guys be the supervisory board? That's what I understand, because you effectively want to take control of the company, but you would be the supervisory board. So why can't you answer those questions?
So I think there's a lot of permutations on who's going to be elected. There's the 5 current. There's 2 dependents from CMB, 3 independents proposed by CMB, and 2 dependents proposed by Frontline. These are, I think, 12 people that could be jointly on the board. I mean, with a maximum of 10. We would be 2 dependents. So 2 out of any combination, we would never have the majority.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much.
Next question is from Gavin Rabolini. You can now turn on your microphone. I think you need to turn on your microphone. Gavin?
Hi, thanks for taking my question. What I'm struggling with a bit is to understand your process around capital allocation. I think both the topics you're referring to around diversification, decarbonization could add a lot of value if you do counter-cyclical investment in an industry like this, but it could also destroy a lot of value if you do pro-cyclical investment. So how do you actually manage the risk of overpaying for assets just for the sake of diversification? And I heard you mention the dry bulk space. Can you just maybe use that as an example to give me some color on your process on allocating capital?
Yeah. So Gavin, your question is the right one. It's the billion-dollar question for any shipping company is when to invest and when to divest. When we say that we think it's a sound strategy for Euronav to diversify, we're not saying diversify at any cost and do it right now. Do it intelligently at the right point in the cycle. When we talk about decarbonization, that has actually nothing to do with the asset values of ships. It has to do with the future-proof strategy of a company. Making sure that you build assets that your customers will want, not in 1 year from now, but in 10 years from now. And this is where we need to add an angle of having either green fuels on board as a fuel or even green molecules being transported. Now, that doesn't happen overnight. I think there's a big misunderstanding, and obviously we've not been able to communicate very openly over the last 10 months. We are not a bunch of crazies that will sell the whole Euronav fleet today to reinvest in whatever 1 day later. Quite frankly, we've been in this for 7 generations. We know how to ride cycles. We're not always right. We've made our mistakes. But the fact that we're still here is that we know how to run a shipping company.
Thanks.
Next question is from Thijs Berkelder. Go ahead, Thijs. You can now turn on your microphone.
Yeah, sorry. I highly appreciated that at least one of the big shareholders gives a bit of flavor on the strategy direction going forward, at least a contemplated one. In your view, is it logical to expect before the EGM to also have a new Frontline/Famatown strategic proposal on the table, following the termination of their combination agreement? Because at this moment, to me, their current intentions are maybe even more vague than yours.
Thank you, Thijs. Even more vague than us, but I would say ask them. Ask them. We don't know. As you can imagine, as I said in the introduction, we will wait until after the General Assembly to truly re-engage with them. Until then, it's what we read in the press, so we don't know what they will do.
But in your view, for the EGM, for the shareholders to have a fair, at least a fair impression on what are we now really voting for, what is the choice and why? Is it then, in your view, not logical to have their stance on the table?
Well, I think also maybe this, by the fact of being a 25% shareholder and having a board that potentially will be also a little bit more shareholder aligned, that is something that we've always advocated. So the fact that they are proposing directors, I think, is in line with how a company should be represented on the board.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I understand where you are coming from, but this, yeah. The strange thing is that for shareholders, they now simply are being forced to vote for people, and not really for a strategy. And that's also what you were saying. Depending on the outcome of the EGM, then we'll have to sit around the table with the board, and then we'll have to see what decisions can be made. So to me, that only sounds as more stagnation instead of getting to a solution. But in that sense, we'll have to see. At least, yeah, I'm happy that you've taken the time to give this explanation, and at least to have somewhat more clarity on what your intentions are. Thanks.
Next question is from Anders Karlsson. Go ahead, Anders.
Yes, thank you. Anders Karlsson, Kepler Cheuvreux. A couple of questions, really. One, you actually said that a large market cap is a good asset, and that kind of contradicts the bigger that you're contradicting a merger that would create a bigger entity. So your thoughts around how you're going to make the market cap larger by following your strategy. And second, can you give a little bit more color on what your representatives would see as a suitable diversification strategy? What segments are you looking at? I mean, from your perspective, is it natural segments to include in a future Euronav, if that's what you're looking at?
Yeah, I'll take your second question. Ludovic will answer on the first one on the balance sheet. Any shipping segment that is mainstream in need of a future-proof strategy. So it's containers, it's dry bulk. As you know, we're also invested in offshore wind, but there's also the offshore oil and gas industry, which is there. All the way to LPG ammonia carriers. These are all the different segments that should be looked at. And I understand your frustration that we cannot give you more concrete information about number of vessels, year of build, and price. But that's just because we are only a shareholder of 25%. We're not in a driving seat. The minute some of our representatives would be put in a driving seat, we will be able to communicate much more openly, because then, of course, the debate will have been had and the choices will have been made.
And on the first question, Anders, on the contradictory between using a large market cap and then obviously being bigger is better. I think there obviously we hint that bigger is better in a mono product with an industry which at some point is going to have a lot of challenges on the cargo they carry, i.e. crude oil. Yes, there we think merging, and becoming a bigger company on the same product, that is not the right way to do it. That's why we advocate diversifying, because a bigger market cap is obviously a good one. But then we see it as a tool to accelerate diversification, larger fleets, looking at, as Alex mentioned, different shipping segments, and the ancillary investments should be done around the investments. As we mentioned on the molecule, transporting it, looking at where it's produced. So we don't believe it's actually contradictory.
Okay, thank you.
Does anyone have a final question? Let's see, a question from Luc van Beek.
Yes, I have a question about CMB Tech, which you mentioned as one of the avenues that you could use to diversify, to bring the company forward. Can you explain a bit more detail how you see that in front of you? Because it looks like quite a different company than Euronav, entirely different specialization. So I would be interested in hearing the way that avenue would look like.
Very shortly, CMB Tech is actually very much like any other shipping company, with one difference. It is using hydrogen as a fuel and ammonia as a fuel. We have today 46 vessels on order. We have some vessels on the water already. We have an engineering and H2 infrastructure department supporting everything. So this is not a small startup. It's actually a proper shipping company. But again, as I said in the beginning, and Luc, I'm sorry for repeating myself, the file is not on the table today. And as we said, and we really mean this, it is only one possible solution to execute the strategy. There could be many others.
Okay, thank you.
I see another question from Jeff Senol. Let me check. Go ahead, Jeff. Now turn on your microphone. I think there's something wrong. Maybe we can go to the next. Robbe, you can now turn on your microphone.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Perfect. Rob van der Ruchten for Belgian press agency Belga. Thank you for taking your time. I can hear you say we've been in this industry for a long time, 7th generation. How would you explain that these investors who can also, I think, look at the cycles on the long term, why is it so hard to convince them of your longer term strategy, you think? I would imagine these people can also look ahead, no?
It's a very good question, Robert. Actually, we don't need to convince investors and shareholders. The people we have tried to convince is the current supervisory board. This is the first time we can talk to other shareholders about the strategy of the group. The biggest stumbling block in this whole process has been the supervisory board. They didn't want to listen and they didn't want to follow us into talking about a new strategy.
Okay, thank you very much.
Let's try Jeff again. Jeff Senol, second time to try it. You can now turn on your microphone. Then a final question from Gavin Rabolini. Gavin, go ahead.
Thanks. My question is around the main rationale for the diversification strategy. So where do you see the main value sit? Is that in exploiting market opportunities in different segments with regards to buying low, or is it actually in implementing your decarbonization strategies within those other segments that you've acquired? And then secondly, can you give me an hypothetical example of an ideal diversification opportunity?
Yes, so it's about diversifying risk, Gavin. So not being entirely dependent on crude oil transportation. And it has a link, of course, to decarbonization, because if you invest in different asset types who all use kind of similar type engines, you have a much broader platform to implement these technologies on.
And if you don't mind, just for my understanding, give me an hypothetical example of what would make an ideal opportunity. What would be the moving parts and the characteristics? Maybe use dry bulk for an example. What would you be looking for to frame an ideal diversification opportunity in that space?
You could build up a fleet of 20 to 30 dry bulk vessels, a fleet of 10 to 20 container vessels, a fleet of 40 to 50 offshore oil and gas vessels that eventually could be turned into offshore wind supply vessels. So these are the kind of elements that I believe would create a great opportunity.
And asset prices, price sensitivity, how would that come into that example?
Well, again, I think there you again would have to ride the cycle and play the cycle. We all try to buy low and sell high. What you definitely want to try to avoid is to buy at the top. So the timing of these acquisitions will, of course, not depend only on the decarbonization agenda, but also on the price at which you can acquire the assets.
Thanks. And then just the last question. In the near term, 2 to 3 years, are there any compelling opportunities that you're seeing at the moment in terms of the diversification?
Many.
And what segments would that be?
I don't think it's this call where we need to elaborate on that, Gavin. But I think there's many opportunities in the shipping world that could be looked at. Whether we have to look at and execute right now today or in 6 months or in 12 months, but there's always opportunities in shipping.
Thanks.
Thank you for all your questions. We will now listen to some closing words from Alexander.
Yes, I don't think I have a lot to add. I would like to thank all of you for your time. Thank you for your questions. If you would have any other question, you can always contact Katrien, and then we will see whether we can then get back to you and answer your questions. So for now, I would say thank you very much and see you all on the 23rd of March at the General Assembly.